Wellington III stepped out of his private jet onto the familiar tarmac of his airport. The humid summer air hit him immediately, a stark contrast to the air-conditioned luxury he had grown accustomed to over the past 15 years. At 38, he was worth more than most small countries, having built a tech empire that revolutionized how people communicated across the globe. His company, Wellington Communications, had started as a small software firm and had grown into a multinational corporation with offices in every major city worldwide. As his black pulled up to the curb, couldn't help but feel a mixture of emotions. He hadn't been home to the small town where he grew up in over a decade. The last time he had visited was for his mother's funeral, a brief and painful affair that had left him even more estranged from his father, Harold Wellington. Their relationship had always been complicated, built on expectations that had never quite understood and disappointments that seemed to grow with each passing year. The drive-through revealed how little had changed. The same oak trees lined Main Street, their branches creating a canopy over the narrow road. The old diner where he used to work summers during high school still had its faded red awning, and the town square looked exactly as it had when he was a teenager dreaming of bigger things. It was both comforting and suffocating, reminding him why he had been so eager to leave all those years ago. Had built his fortune through determination, intelligence, and an almost obsessive work ethic. After graduating from MIT with dual degrees in computer science and business, he had started his first company in a cramped apartment with nothing but a laptop and an idea. The early years had been brutal, filled with 18-hour workdays, ramen noodles, and the constant fear of failure. But gradually, his innovations in communication software had caught the attention of investors, and his company had grown exponentially. Now he employed over 50,000 people worldwide, owned properties on 3 continents, and had been featured on the cover of every major business magazine. Yet as his car pulled through the familiar gates of the Wellington family estate, he felt like that same uncertain young man who had left home with nothing but dreams and determination. The Wellington estate had been in the family for 4 generations. It was a sprawling property with a main house that dated back to the 1920s, surrounded by perfectly manicured gardens and a guest house that had once served as quarters for the household staff. His great-grandfather had made his fortune in steel, his grandfather in oil, and his father had managed the family investments with varying degrees of success. Each generation had added their own touches to the property, creating a mixture of architectural styles that somehow worked together harmoniously. As the car pulled up the circular driveway, noticed that the estate looked different somehow. The gardens, while still well-maintained, seemed to lack the precision they once had. Some of the exterior paint was peeling, and a few of the shutters hung slightly askew. It wasn't dramatic neglect, but it suggested that the property wasn't receiving the same level of attention it once had. Paid the driver and walked slowly toward the front entrance, his footsteps echoing on the stone pathway. The massive oak door with its intricate brass knocker shaped like a lion's head looked exactly as he remembered. He raised his hand to knock, then paused, realizing how strange it was to knock on the door of his childhood home. Instead, he tried the handle and found it unlocked. The foyer was dimly lit, with afternoon sunlight filtering through the stained glass windows that flanked the entrance. The familiar smell of old wood and his mother's favorite lavender potpourri still lingered in the air, though fainter now. Family portraits lined the walls, showing generations of Wellingtons in their finest clothes, all looking stern and prosperous. Had always felt judged by those painted eyes, as if his ancestors were watching to see if he would live up to the family legacy. He set his single piece of luggage down and called out, "Hello, Dad." His voice echoed through the high-ceilinged rooms, but there was no immediate response. The house felt empty, though he knew his father still lived here. Harold Wellington had refused Olive's offers to help him move somewhere smaller and more manageable, insisting that the estate was his responsibility as the family patriarch. Walked through the familiar rooms, each one triggering memories from his childhood. The library where his father had taught him to play chess, the sitting room where the family had gathered for Sunday dinners, the kitchen where his mother had baked cookies every Saturday morning. Everything looked smaller than he remembered, yet the emotional weight of these spaces felt heavier than ever. In the kitchen, he found evidence that someone was indeed living in the house. A single coffee cup sat in the sink, and a newspaper was folded on the small breakfast table. The paper was from 3 days ago, suggesting that his father might not be keeping up with current events the way he once had. Harold had always been meticulous about reading multiple newspapers every morning, claiming that a man needed to understand the world if he was going to succeed in business. Continued his exploration of the house, noting the small changes that time had brought. Some of the furniture was covered with dust cloths, and many of the rooms felt unused. The formal dining room, where the family had hosted elaborate dinner parties when was young, looked like it hadn't been used in years. The grand piano in the music room was covered and silent, its bench pushed underneath as if it were sleeping. As he climbed the curved staircase to the second floor, his hand traced the familiar banister that he had slid down countless times as a child, much to his mother's dismay. The family photos that lined the stairway wall showed a progression of happy moments, family vacations, school graduations, business achievements. But noticed that the photos stopped abruptly around the time he had left for college, as if the family's story had ended when he walked out the front door. His childhood bedroom had been preserved almost exactly as he had left it 18 years ago. The same blue and white striped wallpaper covered the walls, and his high school trophies still sat on the shelf above his desk. A few computer programming books lay open on the bed, marking the spot where he had been studying the night before leaving for MIT. It was like walking into a time capsule, both touching and slightly unsettling. Stood in the doorway for several minutes, remembering the young man who had slept in this room and dreamed of changing the world. In many ways, he had achieved those dreams beyond his wildest imagination. He had built something lasting and meaningful, created jobs for thousands of people, and developed technology that had improved millions of lives. Yet standing in this room, he felt an unexpected emptiness, as if something important had been lost along the way. The sound of a car in the driveway interrupted his thoughts. Walked to the window and saw an old Civic pulling up to the house. A young woman emerged from the driver's seat, carrying what appeared to be cleaning supplies. She was probably in her mid-20s, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and wearing simple work clothes. She moved with purpose and efficiency, suggesting that she was familiar with the house and her routine. Watched as she used her own key to enter through the kitchen door, confirming that she was employed to help maintain the house. This wasn't entirely surprising, as his father was now in his 70s and would likely need assistance with the upkeep of such a large property. What did surprise was that his father had never mentioned hearing help during their infrequent phone conversations. He made his way back downstairs, planning to introduce himself to the woman and ask about his father's whereabouts. As he approached the kitchen, he could hear sounds of activity, cabinets opening and closing, water running, the general bustle of someone going about their work. He paused at the kitchen door, not wanting to startle her. "Hello," he called out as he entered the room. "I'm Wellington, Harold's son." The young woman turned from the sink where she had been filling a bucket with soapy water. She looked surprised but not alarmed, as if she had been told he might be visiting. "Oh, hello, Mr. Wellington. I'm Sophia Martinez. I help your father with the house maintenance." She wiped her hands on a towel and extended one to him. Her handshake was firm and confident, and her eyes were intelligent and kind. "It's nice to meet you, Sophia. How long have you been working here?" Found himself curious about this woman who seemed so comfortable in his childhood home. "About 2 years now," Sophia replied. "Your father hired me after Mrs. retired. She had been the housekeeper here for almost 30 years, but her arthritis got too bad for her to continue." Sophia paused, studying his face. "Your father talks about you often. He's very proud of what you've accomplished." This surprised, as his father had never expressed pride in his achievements during their conversations. If anything, Harold had seemed somewhat resentful of his son's success, as if it highlighted his own failures in managing the family business and investments. "Is he here now? I called to let him know I was coming, but I haven't seen him yet." Sophia's expression became slightly uncomfortable, and she looked away for a moment before answering. "He's upstairs. He's been having some difficult days lately. I'm not sure he remembered that you were coming today." She picked up her bucket of cleaning supplies and headed toward the back stairs that led to the second floor. "I should probably go check on him and let him know you're here." Followed her up the narrow back staircase that had once been used by the household staff in the days when the Wellington family employed a cook, a housekeeper, and a groundskeeper full-time. The stairs creaked under their weight, and noticed that the paint on the walls was chipped and faded. This part of the house had clearly not received the same attention as the more public areas. As they reached the second floor, could hear sounds coming from the master bedroom. His father's voice, raised in what seemed to be anger or frustration, and other sounds that he couldn't immediately identify. Sophia stopped outside the door and knocked gently. "Mr. Wellington, your son is here to see you," she called through the door. The sounds from inside the room stopped abruptly, followed by a period of silence that seemed to stretch on forever. Finally, they heard Harold's voice, weaker and more uncertain than remembered. "Is that really?" Sophia opened the door and gestured for to enter first. What he saw inside stopped him cold and changed everything he thought he knew about his father's life and his own relationship with his family's legacy. The master bedroom that remembered as his parents' sanctuary had been transformed into something that looked more like a medical facility than a private living space. Hospital equipment was scattered around the room. An oxygen tank in one corner, a walker folded against the wall, pill organizers covering the surface of what had once been his mother's elegant dressing table. The heavy curtains were drawn, keeping the room in perpetual twilight, and the air was thick with the smell of medications and antiseptic. But it wasn't the medical equipment that shocked. It was the sight of his father, Harold Wellington, sitting on the edge of the bed in a hospital gown, his hands shaking as he tried to button a shirt that was clearly too large for his diminished frame. The powerful man who had once commanded boardrooms and social gatherings had been reduced to a frail shadow of his former self. His once thick hair was now sparse and completely white, and his skin had the pale, almost translucent quality that comes with serious illness. "Dad," said softly, stepping into the room. He hardly recognized the man before him as the stern, imposing figure who had dominated his childhood. Harold looked up, and for a moment his eyes were bright with recognition and something that might have been joy. "My boy, you came home." His voice was thin and reedy, lacking the authority that remembered. I wasn't sure you would come." Moved closer to the bed, unsure of what to say or do. The last time he had seen his father, 3 years ago at a business conference in New York, Harold had been showing signs of aging, but had still been the commanding presence that remembered. This transformation was devastating and complete. "Of course I came, Dad. When you called and said you needed to see me, I got on the first flight." Sat down in a chair next to the bed, nodding that it had been positioned there specifically for visitors. "How are you feeling?" Harold's hands continued to shake as he struggled with the shirt buttons. Sophia stepped forward automatically, but Harold waved her away with more force than his frail appearance suggested he could muster. "I can do it myself," he said with a flash of his old stubbornness. "I'm not completely helpless yet." But as he continued to fumble with the buttons, his frustration became evident. His hands weren't responding the way he wanted them to, and what should have been a simple task was becoming an insurmountable challenge. Watched his father struggle for several long minutes, feeling helpless and confused. This wasn't the reunion he had imagined during the flight home. He had expected perhaps some awkwardness, given their strained relationship, but he had also expected his father to be the same formidable man he had always been. Instead, he was witnessing something much more vulnerable and frightening. "Let me help," finally said, reaching for the buttons on his father's shirt. "No," Harold's response was sharp and immediate. "I said I can do it myself." But even as he spoke, his hands betrayed him again, and the shirt slipped from his grasp entirely. Sophia stepped forward once more, and this time she didn't wait for permission. "Mr. Wellington, let's get you comfortable first, and then we can work on getting dressed." Her voice was gentle but firm, with the practiced patience of someone who had been dealing with this situation for some time. "I don't need a nursemaid," Harold muttered, but he allowed Sophia to help him remove the shirt entirely and replace it with a more comfortable sweater that didn't require buttons. As Sophia worked, noticed the easy familiarity between his father and the young woman. She anticipated his needs before he expressed them, knew exactly how to position his arms to make dressing easier, and spoke to him with a respectful kindness that somehow maintained his dignity even in his vulnerable state. It was clear that she had been caring for Harold for much longer than the 2 years she had mentioned, or at least that her role had evolved far beyond simple housekeeping. "There," Sophia said as she finished helping Harold with the sweater. "Much better. Would you like me to bring you some tea, or maybe some of that soup you enjoyed yesterday?" Harold nodded, looking suddenly exhausted from the simple effort of getting dressed. "Tea would be nice. Thank you, Sophia," he looked at with what might have been embarrassment. "She takes good care of me, better than I deserve, probably." After Sophia left the room, father and son sat in uncomfortable silence for several minutes. struggled to process what he was seeing and to reconcile this frail, dependent man with the powerful figure who had shaped his childhood. Harold had always been larger than life, a man who expected perfection from himself and everyone around him. To see him reduced to needing help with basic tasks was shocking and deeply unsettling. "How long have you been sick, Dad?" finally asked. Harold sighed, a sound that seemed to come from deep within his diminished chest. "The doctors first noticed something about 3 years ago. Parkinson's disease, they called it. Gets worse over time, they said. Nothing they can really do to stop it." He paused, looking out the window at the gardens he had once taken such pride in maintaining. "At first it was just a little tremor in my hand. Thought it was just old age. But then it got worse. Much worse." Felt a wave of guilt wash over him. 3 years ago, when the symptoms had first appeared, he had been completely absorbed in a major acquisition for his company. He had been working around the clock, traveling constantly, and had brushed off his father's phone calls as unimportant. Even when they had encountered each other at that business conference, had been too distracted by his own concerns to notice that something might be seriously wrong. "Why didn't you tell me?" asked. "I would have come home sooner, I would have helped." Harold laughed, a bitter sound that had no humor in it. "Tell you what, that your old man was falling apart, that the great Harold Wellington couldn't even tie his own shoes anymore." He shook his head slowly. "Besides, you were busy building your empire. I didn't want to be a burden." The word burden hung in the air between them, carrying the weight of years of misunderstanding and miscommunication. Realized that his father's pride, the same quality that had driven him to business success in earlier years, had also prevented him from reaching out when he needed help the most. "You could never be a burden, Dad," said, though even as he spoke the words, he wondered if they were entirely true. His life had been so carefully structured around his business responsibilities that he wasn't sure there would have been room for the kind of care his father clearly needed. Sophia returned with a tea service on a silver tray that remembered from childhood afternoon teas with his mother. She moved efficiently around the room, clearing space on the bedside table and arranging the cups and saucers with practiced ease. As she poured the tea, noticed that she prepared Harold's cup exactly the way he liked it. 2 sugars, no cream, without having to ask. "Thank you, dear," Harold said as she handed him the cup. His hands were steadier now, but could see the concentration it took for him to grip the delicate china without spilling. "Will you need anything else before I continue with the cleaning?" Sophia asked. "What cleaning?" asked, suddenly curious about her regular routine in the house. Sophia glanced at Harold, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "I help maintain the house," she said carefully. "Some of the rooms require more attention than others." "She's being modest," Harold said with what might have been the first genuine smile had seen since entering the room. "Sophia keeps this whole place running, cooks, cleans, helps me with things, don't know what I would do without her." Studied the young woman more carefully, trying to understand her role in his father's life. She was clearly much more than a simple housekeeper, but her position seemed somewhat ambiguous. "Do you live here?" he asked. "I have a small apartment above the garage," Sophia replied. "It made sense when your father's condition got worse. That way I can be available if he needs help during the night." The implications of this arrangement began to sink in. Realized that Sophia was essentially a live-in caregiver, responsible for his father's daily needs in ways that went far beyond housekeeping. The fact that his father had never mentioned this level of dependency during their phone conversations suggested either that Harold's condition was worse than he had been letting on, or that his pride had prevented him from admitting how much help he actually needed. "I should let you get back to your work," said to Sophia, though he was curious to see what this cleaning involved. "Actually," Harold said, "maybe should see what's involved in running this place. He might as well understand what he's inherited." There was something in his father's tone that suggested this wasn't just casual conversation. Looked between Harold and Sophia, sensing that there was more to this situation than he was understanding. "What do you mean inherited?" asked. Harold set down his teacup with hands that shook slightly. "We'll talk about that later. For now, why don't you go with Sophia, see what it takes to keep the Wellington legacy alive?" Sophia looked uncomfortable with this suggestion, but she nodded when Harold gave her an encouraging look. "If you'd like to come with me, Mr. Wellington, I can show you around, help you understand what's involved in maintaining the property." Followed Sophia out of the bedroom, his mind racing with questions about his father's condition, Sophia's role in his care, and what Harold had meant about inheritance. As they walked down the hallway, Sophia moved with the efficiency of someone who knew every inch of the house and had a specific routine to follow. "Where are we going first?" asked. Sophia paused at the top of the main staircase, seeming to choose her words carefully. "Your father. He has good days and bad days. Today is actually one of his better days, but on the bad days he sometimes has accidents, needs help with personal care." She looked directly at, her expression serious. "What I'm about to show you might be difficult to see, but your father insisted that you should know the truth about what his life is like now." They descended the stairs together, and Sophia led him toward a part of the house that had never paid much attention to as a child, the area that connected the main house to the original servants' quarters. As they walked, Sophia explained that this section of the house had been modified to create a more accessible living space for Harold on his worst days. "We installed a bathroom down here," Sophia said, opening a door that remembered as leading to a storage closet. "It has grab bars and a shower seat, things that make it easier for him when he's having trouble with mobility." The bathroom was small but efficiently designed, clearly installed by someone who understood the specific needs of a person with Parkinson's disease. Was impressed by the thoughtfulness of the modifications, but he was also struck by the reality of what they represented, his father's gradual loss of independence. "How bad does it get?" asked. Sophia hesitated before answering. "Some days he can't dress himself, some days he has trouble remembering things, and sometimes—" She trailed off, then seemed to make a decision to continue. "Sometimes he has accidents and needs help cleaning up. That's part of what I do here. It's not glamorous work, but it's necessary." Began to understand the true scope of Sophia's responsibilities and the depth of his father's dependence on her. This young woman, probably 15 years younger than himself, had taken on the role of primary caregiver for a proud man who had once been one of the most powerful people in the state. It was both admirable and heartbreaking. "That must be incredibly difficult," said, "for both of you." "Your father is a good man," Sophia replied simply. "He treats me with respect and pays me well. More importantly, he trusts me to help him maintain his dignity even when his body betrays him." As they continued through the house, Sophia showed the various adaptations that had been made to accommodate Harold's changing needs. Handrails had been installed along several hallways. Furniture had been rearranged to create clearer pathways, and medical supplies were strategically located throughout the house for easy access. In the kitchen, Sophia began preparing what appeared to be a very specific meal, measuring medications into a pill organizer and preparing soft foods that would be easy for Harold to eat. Every action was precise and purposeful, suggesting a routine that had been developed through careful attention to his changing needs. "You're more than a housekeeper," observed. "You're a trained caregiver." Sophia smiled for the first time since he had met her. "I was in nursing school when I started working here. Your father encouraged me to continue my education and even helped pay for some of my classes. I graduated 6 months ago, but I chose to stay here rather than take a job at the hospital." "Why?" asked, genuinely curious. "Because he needed me," Sophia said simply. "And because this job taught me more about compassion and dignity than any textbook ever could." As they finished in the kitchen, Sophia picked up a bucket of cleaning supplies and headed toward the back stairs. "I need to finish cleaning the bathrooms upstairs," she said. "Your father is particular about keeping everything clean and sanitary. With his condition, it's important to maintain a healthy environment." Followed her up the stairs, still processing everything he had learned about his father's situation and Sophia's role in his care. As they reached the second floor, he could hear his father's voice coming from the master bathroom, talking to himself in the way that people sometimes do when they're concentrating on a difficult task. Sophia approached the bathroom door and knocked gently. "Mr. Wellington, is everything all right?" "Just trying to." Harold's voice was strained with effort. "Can't seem to." Harold Wellington was on his hands and knees on the marble floor of his own master bathroom, wearing rubber gloves that were too large for his diminished hands, scrubbing the base of the toilet with a cleaning brush. His movements were slow and unsteady, his whole body trembling with the effort of maintaining his position. The sight was so unexpected and devastating that felt his breath catch in his throat. The man who had once commanded respect in boardrooms across the country, who had been invited to exclusive social gatherings and consulted on major business decisions, was reduced to cleaning his own toilet because his pride wouldn't allow him to admit that he sometimes couldn't make it there in time. The reality of what was witnessing hit him like a physical blow. "Dad, what are you doing?" asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Harold looked up from his position on the floor, his face flushed with exertion and humiliation. "Had an accident this morning," he said matter-of-factly, though could hear the shame underlying his casual tone. "Can't expect Sophia to clean up every mess I make." Sophia immediately moved forward, kneeling down beside Harold on the floor. "Mr. Wellington, we've talked about this. You don't need to clean this yourself. That's what I'm here for." Her voice was gentle but firm, the tone of someone who had clearly had this conversation many times before. "I'm not completely helpless," Harold protested, though his shaking hands betrayed the weakness he was trying to hide. "I can still clean up my own messes." Watched in stunned silence as Sophia gently but persistently took the cleaning brush from his father's trembling hands. "You're right, you're not helpless," she said. "But this is my job, and I'm much better at it than you are." She smiled as she said this, somehow managing to preserve Harold's dignity even as she took over a task that was clearly beyond his physical capabilities. The casual way that Sophia transitioned from conversation to action spoke volumes about their daily routine. This wasn't an unusual occurrence. It was something that happened regularly enough that both of them had developed strategies for dealing with it. Began to understand that his father's accidents weren't occasional incidents, but a regular part of his life with Parkinson's disease. Harold allowed Sophia to help him to his feet, though could see the effort it took for him to accept even this small assistance. His father had always been fiercely independent, the type of man who would rather struggle alone than admit he needed help. To see him in this vulnerable position was heartbreaking, but watching Sophia's respectful, efficient care was also somehow inspiring. "Let me finish this," Sophia said, already working with practiced efficiency to clean and sanitize the bathroom. "Why don't you go downstairs? I'll bring you some lunch in a few minutes." Harold nodded, his earlier burst of energy already fading. Could see the exhaustion creeping back into his father's face, the way his shoulders sagged as if the simple effort of being upright was almost too much to bear. As they walked slowly back toward the bedroom, Harold leaning heavily on his arm, the reality of his father's situation became impossible to ignore. "How long has this been happening?" asked as he helped his father sit down on the edge of the bed. "The accident started about 8 months ago," Harold admitted, his voice barely audible. "At first it was just once in a while, usually at night, but now—" He trailed off, unable or unwilling to finish the sentence. Sat down in the bedside chair, trying to process what he was witnessing. "Dad, why didn't you tell me it had gotten this bad? I could have hired additional help, found better medical care, moved you somewhere with professional nursing staff." Harold's response was immediate and fierce, despite his physical weakness. "I am not going to some nursing home to die among strangers," he said with more force than had heard from him all day. "This is my home, my family's home. I'll die here if I have to, but I won't be warehoused somewhere just because my body is failing me." The passion in his father's voice reminded of the powerful man Harold had once been. Even diminished by disease and age, his core personality remained unchanged. Proud, stubborn, and determined to maintain control over his own life regardless of the cost. "I didn't mean a nursing home," said carefully. "I meant professional help here at home, trained nurses, physical therapists, whatever you need to be comfortable." "Sophia is trained," Harold replied. "She knows my routines, my preferences, my moods. She doesn't treat me like an invalid or try to manage my life for me. Most importantly, she doesn't judge me when I fail to live up to the standards I set for myself." Glanced toward the bathroom where Sophia was still working, her quiet efficiency allowing them to have this conversation without feeling rushed or observed. "She's remarkable," he admitted. "But Dad, this is a lot to ask of one person. What happens when she gets sick or needs time off or decides she wants to pursue her nursing career somewhere else?" Harold was quiet for a long moment, looking out the window at the estate grounds that had been his pride and joy for so many years. "I suppose I'll have to cross that bridge when I come to it," he said finally. "But for now, Sophia and I have an arrangement that works for both of us." "What kind of arrangement?" asked, though he wasn't sure he really wanted to know the answer. Harold looked at his son with eyes that were suddenly sharp and calculating, reminding that despite his physical deterioration, his father's mind was still keen. "She takes care of me, and I take care of her. I've paid for her nursing school, helped her with living expenses, made sure she has health insurance and a good salary. In return, she helps me maintain my independence and dignity for as long as possible. The arrangement made sense from a practical standpoint, but couldn't shake the feeling that there was something unusual about the relationship between his father and this young woman. It wasn't romantic, that much was clear from their interactions, but it was deeply personal in a way that went beyond a typical employer-employee relationship. Sophia returned from the bathroom carrying a basket of cleaning supplies and looking as composed as ever. "All finished," she announced. "Would you like me to help you get comfortable for your nap, Mr. Wellington?" "I don't need a nap," Harold protested, though could see the exhaustion in his father's posture. "Of course not," Sophia agreed smoothly. "You never need a nap, but you might enjoy resting your eyes for a few minutes while I prepare lunch." She had clearly learned how to manage Harold's pride while still ensuring he got the rest and care he needed. As Sophia helped Harold adjust his pillows and get comfortable on the bed, watched their easy interaction with a mixture of gratitude and something that might have been jealousy. This young woman knew his father better than he did, understood his needs and moods in a way that had never achieved even during his childhood. She had become the family that had never managed to be. "I'll be downstairs if you need anything," Sophia said to Harold, then turned to, "Would you like to see the rest of the house? There are some things your father has asked me to show you." Followed Sophia out of the bedroom and down the main staircase, his mind still reeling from everything he had witnessed. As they walked through the familiar rooms of his childhood home, Sophia began explaining the financial realities of maintaining the estate with Harold's declining health. "The medical expenses are significant," she said matter-of-factly. "The medications alone cost nearly $2,000 a month, even with insurance. Then there are the physical therapy sessions, the medical equipment, the home modifications we've had to make." She paused in the library, looking around at the shelves of books that had once been Harold's pride and joy. "Your father has been very careful about managing expenses, but the costs keep going up." Was surprised by this information. He had always assumed that his father was financially comfortable, with income from family investments and his successful business career. "Is money becoming a problem?" he asked. Sophia looked uncomfortable with the question. "That's something you should probably discuss with your father, but I will say that he's been very concerned about making sure I'm taken care of if something happens to him. He's been making arrangements." The way she said, "arrangements," suggested that there was more to this story than was understanding. He made a mental note to have a serious conversation with his father about finances, estate planning, and long-term care options. As they continued through the house, Sophia showed the daily routine that kept everything running smoothly. She maintained a schedule that was both rigid and flexible, ensuring that Harold's medical needs were met while also preserving as much of his normal routine as possible. It was clear that she understood the psychological importance of maintaining familiar patterns even as his physical capabilities declined. In the kitchen, Sophia began preparing lunch with the same methodical approach she brought to everything else. As she worked, she explained some of the challenges involved in caring for someone with Parkinson's disease. "The symptoms change from day to day," she said, measuring out medications with careful precision. "Some days his hands shake so badly he can't hold a fork. Other days he's almost like his old self. The uncertainty is one of the hardest parts for both of us." Watched her prepare what was obviously a carefully planned meal, with foods chosen for their nutritional value and ease of consumption. Everything about Sophia's approach suggested professional training combined with personal dedication that went far beyond what any employer had the right to expect. "You said you graduated from nursing school," said. "Are you planning to continue working here long-term, or do you want to work in a hospital or clinic?" Sophia paused in her meal preparation, considering her answer carefully. "Your father and I have an understanding," she said finally. "I'll stay as long as he needs me and as long as I'm able to provide the level of care he requires. Beyond that," she shrugged, "we'll see what happens." There was something in her tone that suggested this arrangement was more complicated than she was letting on. But before could pursue the topic further, they heard Harold calling from upstairs. Sophia immediately set aside what she was doing and headed toward the stairs, with following behind her. They found Harold sitting on the edge of his bed, looking disoriented and slightly panicked. "I can't remember," he was saying to himself. "I can't remember if I took my medication this morning." Sophia approached him calmly, pulling out a weekly pill organizer from the bedside table. "Let's check together," she said, showing him the compartment for that morning's pills. "See, they're gone, which means you took them at 8 o'clock, just like always." Harold studied the pill organizer for a moment, then nodded with visible relief. "Right, 8 o'clock, I remember now." But could see that he didn't really remember. He was simply trusting Sophia's system and her word. This small incident revealed another aspect of Harold's condition that hadn't been aware of: the cognitive effects that sometimes accompanied Parkinson's disease. His father wasn't just dealing with physical symptoms. He was also experiencing memory problems and confusion that made him dependent on Sophia in ways that went beyond physical care. As they helped Harold get comfortable again, began to understand the true scope of his father's dependence on Sophia. She wasn't just a caregiver or housekeeper. She had become his anchor to reality, his connection to the routine and structure that helped him maintain his sense of self despite his failing body and increasingly unreliable mind. "Sophia," Harold said as she was adjusting his pillows, "would you mind showing the office? I think it's time he understood the complete situation." Sophia nodded, though noticed a flash of something: concern, reluctance cross her face before she composed herself. "Of course, are you comfortable here for a few minutes?" Harold waved them away with a gesture that was meant to appear casual but obviously took effort. "Go on, I'm fine, just tired." The home office that remembered as his father's sanctuary of power and organization had been transformed into something that looked more like a war room for managing a losing battle. The mahogany desk that had once been clear and imposing was now covered with stacks of medical bills, insurance paperwork, and legal documents. File cabinets lined the walls, their drawers labeled with categories that painted a stark picture of Harold's current reality. Medical expenses 2024, insurance claims, home modifications, legal documents, and most ominously, estate planning. Sophia moved to the desk and began organizing some of the papers, clearly familiar with the system that had been established to manage Harold's complex affairs. "Your father asked me to show you this because he wants you to understand the financial situation," she said, her voice carefully neutral. Picked up a stack of medical bills from the desk, scanning the amounts with growing alarm. The numbers were staggering: thousands of dollars for medications, tens of thousands for medical equipment, enormous sums for home nursing care and physical therapy. Even with insurance, the out-of-pocket expenses were substantial and relentless. "How long has it been this bad?" asked, continuing to flip through the bills. "The expenses started climbing about a year and a half ago when your father's condition became more severe," Sophia explained. "At first, insurance covered most of the costs, but as his needs became more specialized, we've had to pay for a lot of services out of pocket." Found a spreadsheet that Sophia had obviously created, tracking monthly expenses with meticulous detail. The pattern was clear and frightening. Costs were increasing every month while Harold's income remained fixed. His father was spending down his savings at an alarming rate, and at the current pace, the money would run out within 2 to 3 years. "Does he know how bad the financial situation is?" asked. Sophia nodded grimly. "He knows. That's why he's been making arrangements." She moved to one of the file cabinets and pulled out a thick folder labeled Estate Planning. He's been working with lawyers to restructure his affairs, trying to protect what's left of the family assets. As examined the legal documents, he began to understand the scope of his father's planning. Harold had been systematically liquidating investments, selling properties, and restructuring his estate to ensure that the most valuable assets would be preserved. But most shocking of all were the documents that showed Sophia's name appearing repeatedly throughout the paperwork. "He's leaving you money?" asked, looking at a life insurance policy that listed Sophia as a major beneficiary. Sophia's face flushed with embarrassment. "Your father insisted. He said that I've given up years of my life to take care of him, that I deserve security in return." She paused, clearly uncomfortable with the topic. "He also said that you have your own fortune and don't need the family money the way I do." Continued reading through the documents, discovering that his father had not only provided for Sophia financially, but had also begun the process of transferring ownership of portions of the estate to her. The implications were staggering. Sophia, a young woman he had met only hours before, was positioned to inherit a significant portion of the Wellington family legacy. "How do you feel about this?" asked, studying Sophia's face carefully. Sophia sat down heavily in one of the office chairs, suddenly looking much older than her 26 years. Honestly, it makes me incredibly uncomfortable. I didn't take this job expecting anything like this. I just wanted to help your father and earn enough money to pay for my education. She gestured at the legal documents scattered across the desk. This feels like way too much responsibility. Could hear the sincerity in her voice, but he was struggling to process the reality of what his father had done. Harold had essentially adopted Sophia into the family, providing for her as if she were a daughter while his actual son had been absent and uninvolved. The guilt was overwhelming, but so was the practical concern about what this arrangement meant for the family legacy. "Has he discussed this with you?" Sophia asked. "The inheritance arrangements, I mean." "No," admitted. "We haven't talked about estate planning at all. I just assumed. I guess I assumed that he would leave everything to me and that I would figure out how to handle it when the time came." Sophia pulled out another folder, this one labeled Correspondence. Inside were copies of letters that Harold had written to over the past 2 years, letters that had apparently never been sent. Read through them with growing astonishment and shame. His father had been documenting his declining health, his financial concerns, and his increasing dependence on Sophia. He had been reaching out for connection and support, but had never actually sent the letters. "Why didn't he send these?" asked, his voice barely audible. "Pride," Sophia said simply. "He didn't want to seem like he was asking for help or trying to manipulate you into visiting out of guilt." She paused, looking out the window at the estate grounds. "He talks about you all the time, how proud he is of what you've accomplished, how much he wishes you could have a better relationship, how much he regrets the way things have been between you." Sat down heavily in his father's desk chair, surrounded by evidence of a life that was falling apart while he had been obliviously building his business empire. The contrast between his own success and his father's struggle was stark and painful. While he'd been accumulating wealth beyond his ability to spend, his father had been quietly depleting his savings to pay for basic medical care. "What does he want from me?" asked. "I mean, why did he finally ask me to come home now?" Sophia was quiet for a long moment before answering. "I think he wants to make peace with you before it's too late, and I think he wants to make sure that his affairs are in order, that the people who matter to him are taken care of." She looked directly at. "He's dying, Mr. Wellington. Maybe not immediately, but the disease is progressive and incurable. He knows he doesn't have much time left." The blunt statement hit like a physical blow. Despite everything he had witnessed, he had been unconsciously assuming that his father's condition was manageable, that with proper care and medical attention, Harold could continue living indefinitely. The reality that his father was actively dying, that their time together was limited and precious, changed everything. "How long?" asked. "The doctors won't give a specific timeline," Sophia replied. "But based on how quickly his condition has deteriorated over the past 6 months, probably no more than a year or two, maybe less if complications develop." Stared at the financial projections on Sophia's spreadsheet, understanding now why his father had been so concerned about estate planning. Harold was racing against time to ensure that his final affairs were settled before his money ran out or his condition became completely unmanageable. "What can I do?" asked. "How can I help?" Sophia smiled sadly. "The money isn't really the issue. Your father knows that you could easily cover his medical expenses without any impact on your own finances. What he needs is more complicated than that." "What do you mean?" "He needs to know that his life mattered, that the family legacy will continue, that the relationships he cared about will be preserved." Sophia gathered up some of the paperwork and returned it to its proper files. "He needs to make peace with the past and feel confident about the future." As they talked, began to understand that his father's planning went beyond simple estate management. Harold was trying to create a structure that would preserve not just his assets, but his values, his relationships, and his sense of purpose. The arrangement with Sophia wasn't just about providing for her financially. It was about ensuring that someone who understood and respected Harold's vision would be responsible for maintaining the family legacy. "He wants me to get to know you," said, understanding suddenly why his father had insisted that Sophia show him around the house and explain the situation. "He wants to make sure I understand what you've done for him and why he trusts you with this responsibility." Sophia nodded. "He also wants to make sure that you and I can work together if necessary. He knows that his arrangements are unconventional. He's hoping that you'll understand his reasoning and support his decisions." thought about this for several minutes, trying to imagine what it would be like to share the responsibility for his family's legacy with this remarkable young woman. The idea was foreign and somewhat uncomfortable, but he couldn't deny that Sophia had demonstrated more dedication to Harold's welfare than himself had shown in years. "What do you want?" asked. "I mean, what would you choose if money and obligation weren't factors?" Sophia considered the question carefully before answering. "I want your father to be comfortable and dignified for whatever time he has left. I want to honor the trust he's placed in me without overstepping my bounds. And I want to make sure that when this is all over, you and I can both feel good about how we handled our responsibilities to him." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of Harold calling from upstairs, his voice carrying a note of urgency that immediately put both and Sophia on alert. They rushed from the office and up the stairs, finding Harold standing unsteadily in the hallway outside his bedroom, looking confused and distressed. "I can't find," he was saying to himself. "Where did I put?" He looked up as they approached, his expression clearing slightly. "Oh, there you are. I was looking for you both." Sophia approached him carefully, her voice calm and reassuring. "We're right here, Mr. Wellington. What did you need?" Harold looked between and Sophia, seeming to gather his thoughts with effort. "I wanted to talk to you both together about the arrangements, about what happens next." He wavered slightly on his feet and quickly moved to support his arm. "Should we go back to your room so you can sit down?" suggested. Harold nodded gratefully, allowing them to help him back to the bedroom and get settled on the bed. Once he was comfortable, he looked at his son with an expression that was both hopeful and apprehensive. "Sophia showed you the paperwork?" he asked. "Yes," replied. "Dad, we need to talk about all of this, the finances, the estate planning, everything." Harold smiled with what might have been relief. "I was hoping you would say that. There's a lot we need to discuss and not much time to do it." He paused, looking out the window at the late afternoon light filtering through the trees. "But first, there's something else I need to tell you, something about Sophia's role here that goes beyond what you've seen so far." And Sophia exchanged glances, both sensing that Harold was about to reveal something significant. As Harold Wellington took a deep breath, his hands trembling slightly as he prepared to speak. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across his bedroom, and in that golden light could see both the frail man his father had become and echoes of the powerful figure he had once been. "There's something about Sophia that you need to understand," Harold began, his voice stronger than it had been all day. "Something that makes this situation more complicated than a simple employer-employee relationship." Felt his stomach tighten with apprehension. He had already been struggling to process everything he had learned about his father's condition and Sophia's role in his care. Now it seemed there were additional layers to the story that he wasn't prepared for. Sophia shifted uncomfortably in her chair, clearly knowing what Harold was about to reveal. "Mr. Wellington, are you sure this is the right time?" she asked gently. "There may not be a better time," Harold replied. "Deserves to know the truth, and I need to explain my decisions while I still can." He turned his attention back to his son. "Sophia isn't just my caregiver, she's family." The word family hung in the air, loaded with implications that wasn't sure he wanted to understand. "What do you mean?" he asked carefully. Harold reached for a framed photograph on his bedside table, one that hadn't noticed before. It showed a young Hispanic woman holding a baby, standing in front of what appeared to be a small house in a rural setting. The woman looked remarkably like Sophia, but older, with the same intelligent eyes and kind smile. "This is Maria Martinez," Harold said, holding the photograph so could see it clearly. "Sophia's mother. She worked for our family for 15 years, starting when you were about 10 years old." Studied the photograph, trying to place the woman in his childhood memories. Gradually, recognition dawned. The woman who helped Mom with the house cleaning, the one who made those amazing tamales for Christmas. "That's right," Harold confirmed. "Maria was much more than a housekeeper to your mother and me. She became a trusted friend, someone we could rely on for anything. When your mother got sick, Maria was the one who helped me take care of her during those final months." Remembered his mother's long illness, the slow decline that had been so difficult for everyone in the family. He had been away at college for most of it, coming home for visits but not really understanding the day-to-day reality of what his parents were going through. The idea that this woman, Maria, had been a crucial source of support during that terrible time was both touching and somewhat embarrassing, since he had barely known her. Maria was diagnosed with cancer about 8 years ago, Harold continued. She didn't have insurance, couldn't afford the treatment she needed. Your mother and I helped pay for her medical care, but it wasn't enough. She died 3 years later, leaving Sophia alone at 19 with no family and no resources. Sophia spoke for the first time since Harold had begun his story. Mr. Wellington offered to help me pay for college. He said that my mother had been like family to him and your mother, and that taking care of me was the least he could do to honor her memory. Began to understand the deeper connections that had led to the current situation. Sophia wasn't a stranger who had wandered into their lives. She was the daughter of someone who had been part of the Wellington family in all but name. Harold's decision to provide for her wasn't just an employer's generosity. It was a father figure taking responsibility for the child of someone he had loved and respected. When I got sick and needed help, Harold continued, Sophia was finishing nursing school. She offered to work for me part-time to help pay her expenses. It seemed like a perfect arrangement. She needed the money and experience, and I needed someone I could trust to help me maintain my independence. But it became more than that, observed, beginning to see the full picture. Much more, Harold confirmed. Sophia has become the daughter I never had, the family member who understands what I need before I ask for it. She's given up career opportunities to take care of me, turned down job offers at hospitals because she knew I needed her here. Sophia looked uncomfortable with this description. It wasn't entirely selfless, she said. Mr. Wellington has done more for me than I could ever repay. He paid for my education, helped me when my mother was sick, gave me a place to live when I had nowhere else to go. Taking care of him isn't a burden, it's a privilege. Could see the genuine affection between his father and Sophia, the way they had created a family bond that transcended traditional categories. It was touching and admirable, but it also highlighted his own absence from his father's life in painful detail. While he had been building his business empire, this young woman had been filling the role that he should have been playing as Harold's son. That's why the inheritance arrangements are the way they are, Harold explained. Sophia has earned a place in this family through her actions and her loyalty. She's been more of a daughter to me than you've been a son, though I don't say that to hurt you, just to explain my reasoning. The words stung, but couldn't argue with their truth. Sophia had been present for his father's worst moments, had sacrificed her own opportunities to provide comfort and care, had become Harold's anchor during the most difficult period of his life. Meanwhile, had been absent, focused on his own success while his father struggled alone with progressive illness. I'm not trying to replace you, Sophia said too, clearly sensing his discomfort. Your father loves you and is incredibly proud of what you've accomplished. But he needed someone here, someone who could be present in ways that you couldn't be because of your responsibilities. My responsibilities, repeated, tasting the bitterness of his own excuse. I told myself I was too busy to visit, too important to take time off from building my company, but the truth is I was probably just afraid. Afraid of what? Harold asked, his voice gentle. Struggled to put his feelings into words. Afraid of not living up to your expectations, afraid of seeming weak or unsuccessful in your eyes, afraid of having to deal with emotions and relationships instead of just focusing on business problems that I could solve. He paused, looking around the room that held so many memories of his complicated relationship with his father. I guess I was afraid of being human instead of just being successful. Harold reached out with a shaking hand and touched his arm. Son, I never wanted you to choose between success and family. I was proud of your ambition, your drive to build something meaningful. I just wished you could have found a way to include us in that success instead of using it to keep us at a distance. For the first time since arriving home, felt tears threatening. The conversation was opening wounds that he had kept carefully buried for years, forcing him to confront the ways he had failed as a son while pursuing excellence as a businessman. What do you want from me now? Asked. I mean, realistically, what can I do to make things right? Harold smiled, the first genuinely happy expression had seen from him all day. I want you to be present, not just physically, but emotionally. I want you to get to know Sophia, to understand what she means to this family. I want you to help me figure out how to preserve the things that matter most while there's still time. Sophia stood up and moved to the window, giving father and son some privacy for their conversation. I should start dinner, she said. You two probably have a lot to discuss. Actually, Harold said, I'd like you to stay. What I'm about to propose involves both of you. Looked between his father and Sophia, wondering what kind of arrangement Harold had in mind. Given everything he had learned about their relationship and his father's estate planning, he suspected it was going to be something unprecedented and challenging. "I want to create a foundation," Harold said. "Something that will preserve the Wellington family legacy while also honoring Maria Martinez's memory and Sophia's contributions to our family. I want it to provide healthcare assistance to families dealing with serious illness, the kind of support that could have saved Maria's life if it had been available." The idea was ambitious and meaningful, a way to transform personal tragedy into something that could help others facing similar challenges. Could immediately see the potential impact of such a foundation, as well as the complexities involved in making it work. "I want both of you to run it together," Harold continued. "Brings the business expertise and financial resources. Sophia brings the healthcare knowledge and understanding of what families actually need when they're dealing with serious illness." Looked at Sophia, trying to imagine what it would be like to work closely with her on such a project. The idea was appealing in many ways. It would give him a reason to be more present in his father's life, create something meaningful from his wealth, and establish a working relationship with someone his father clearly trusted and valued. "What do you think?" Harold asked, looking between and Sophia. Sophia spoke first. "I think it's a beautiful idea, but I also think it's important that, and I have time to get to know each other before we commit to something this significant." Nodded, appreciating Sophia's practical approach. "I agree. This could be amazing, but we need to make sure we can work together effectively." He paused, thinking about the logistics involved. "And I need to restructure some of my business responsibilities so I can be more present here." Harold's face lit up with enthusiasm and relief. "So you're both willing to consider it?" "More than consider it," said. "I want to make this happen, but Dad, I also want to make sure you're getting the best possible medical care. Money isn't an issue. We should bring in specialists, get second opinions, explore every possible treatment option." Harold said gently, "I appreciate that, but I've already had the best medical care available. The disease is what it is. What I need now isn't more doctors or experimental treatments. I need to know that the people I love will be taken care of, and that my life will have meant something beyond just accumulating wealth." Sophia returned to her chair and looked at both men seriously. "If we're going to do this, the foundation, working together, being a family, we need to establish some ground rules. We need to be honest with each other, even when it's uncomfortable. We need to respect each other's boundaries and contributions. And we need to put your fathers first always." Found himself impressed by Sophia's directness and maturity. Despite being 15 years younger than him, she had a clarity about relationships and priorities that he had never developed. Working with her would undoubtedly challenge him in ways he wasn't accustomed to, but it might also teach him things he needed to learn about being human rather than just being successful. "There's one more thing," Harold said, his voice becoming more serious. "I need you both to understand that my time is limited. This foundation, this partnership between you two, it has to be built quickly if I'm going to be part of it. I want to see it launched, want to know that it's real and sustainable before." He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. Understood that his father was asking them to create something meaningful while there was still time for him to be involved, to see his vision become reality rather than just hoping it would happen after he was gone. "How long do we have?" asked. Harold smiled sadly. "According to the doctors, maybe 6 months before I'll be too confused to participate meaningfully. Maybe a year before," he shrugged. "So if we're going to do this, we need to start immediately." Looked around the room where he had learned so much about his father's life and his own failures as a son. Everything had changed in the span of a single day. His understanding of his father's condition, his knowledge of Sophia's role in Harold's life, his own sense of what mattered most. The successful businessman who had walked into this house a few hours earlier no longer existed. In his place was someone who was finally ready to be a son, a partner, and maybe even a decent human being. "Then let's get started," said, reaching out to take his father's trembling hand while Sophia smiled with quiet satisfaction. "We have work to do." Outside, the sun was setting over the Wellington estate, casting everything in golden light that seemed to promise new beginnings even as it marked the end of another day. In the master bedroom where 3 generations of Wellington men had been born, Harold Wellington closed his eyes and smiled, finally at peace with the knowledge that his legacy would continue through the most unlikely partnership imaginable. His absent son, and the remarkable young woman who had taught them both what family really meant. They settled into chairs beside his bed, realized that despite everything he had learned so far, he still didn't understand the complete picture of his father's situation or Sophia's place in it. The most important revelations were yet to come. Followed Sophia down the hallway to what had once been his father's home office, a room he remembered as the command center of Harold's business operations. As Sophia opened the door and stepped aside to let him enter first, realized that he was about to learn something that would change his understanding of his father's situation even more dramatically than everything he had already discovered. Sophia immediately opened the door and stepped inside, with following behind her. What he saw in that bathroom would change everything he thought he knew about pride, dignity, and what it really meant to care for another person.